Zakat on gold and silver. 50. Whether gold and silver are in the form of bars or coins, and regardless of the purpose for which they are held, if they reach the NISAB threshold and a year has passed since they were acquired, they are subject to zakat. The NISAB for gold is 20 MISKALS. The NISAB for silver is 200 dirhams. 1 miskal is 20 kirats. Each kirat weighs 5 barley grains. 1 SHARI'AH dirham is equal to 14 kirats. Therefore, 10 SHARI'AH dirhams are equivalent to 7 miskals in weight. There is also an ARE dirham, which is equal to 16 kirats. Therefore, 20 miskal are equal to 25 customary dirhams. 200 SHARI'AH dirhams are also equal to 175 customary dirhams. According to some scholars of Islamic jurisprudence, the customary dirham of each region should be used as the basis for zakat and fitrah charitable givings. Accordingly, the NISAB for silver is 200 customary dirhams. Fatwas have been issued in this manner. Consider the matter of fitrah. 51. Just as the zakat on 20 miskal of gold is half a miskal of gold, the zakat on 200 dirhams of silver is 5 dirhams of silver. As long as the amount of gold exceeding 20 miskal does not reach 4 miskal, and the amount of silver exceeding 200 dirham does not reach 40 dirham, no additional zakat is required for these excess amounts. However, if there is another commercial good in addition to this excess amount, then zakat must be paid on the total amount, including these excess amounts. However, if the amount exceeding the NISAB in gold and silver is equal in value to 4 miskals or 40 dirhams, zakat is also required on this excess. This is the view of Imam AZAM, according to 2 imams, Imam Muhammad and Imam Abu Yusuf. However, zakat must be paid on such defective items. Nitrogen monoxide matter. What? Example, if a person has only 239 dirhams of silver, according to Imam AZAM, zakat of 5 dirhams must be paid only on the 200 dirhams. Zakat is not required for the remaining 39 dirhams. Zakat is not due unless this remainder reaches 40. According to 2 imams, zakat must also be paid on these remainders at a rate of 1/4. Furthermore, if a person possesses only 270 dirhams of silver, according to Imam AZAM, they must pay 6 dirhams in zakat on 240 dirhams, and nothing is required for the remaining 30 dirhams. However, according to the 2 imams, zakat is also required for this remaining portion. The same ruling applies to gold. 52. Regarding the NISAB for gold and silver, zakat is determined by their weight, not their value. There is consensus on this. Accordingly, a person on whom zakat is obligatory, for example, 2 sheep for a person of modest means, may pay zakat either by giving their value in money or by giving 1 good sheep, equal in value to these 2. This is because sheep are assets based on value, and there is nitrogen monoxide riba, interest involved in them. However, for assets where riba transactions can take place, weight not value is considered. For example, in place of the 5 kilos of wheat required for zakat, one cannot give 4 kilos of high-quality wheat. Likewise, instead of 2 miskals of gold, one cannot give a piece of gold weighing 1 miskal but having a value equal to 2 miskals due to its artistic workmanship, because in this case, riba interest occurs. This issue is addressed by Imam AZAM and 2 other imams. According to Imam Zufar, it is permissible because the values are equal. When the values are equal, riba cannot be considered between the servant and Almighty Allah. For properties subject to riba, refer to the sections on disliked acts and judicial preference. 54. Zakat is also required on items such as jewelry sets and decorative items made of gold or silver, as well as paintings, once they reach the NISAB amount. If this zakat is to be paid with property of a different kind, value rather than weight is considered. There is consensus on this point. However, if it is to be paid with property of the same kind, according to Imam AZAM and Imam Abu Yusuf, their weights are taken as the basis. According to Imam Zufar, their value is taken into account. According to Imam Muhammad, the option that is more beneficial for the poor is given priority. Example, a gold bracelet weighing 20 miskals, even if its artistic value amounts to 25 miskals, is assessed as follows. If zakat is to be paid in another metal, such as silver, zakat must be calculated based on its value of 25 miskal, not its weight of 20 miskal. However, if the zakat is to be paid in gold of the same kind, according to the Imam and Imam Abu Yusuf, it must be based on 20 miskals of gold by weight. According to Imam Muhammad and Imam Zufar, this is not sufficient. Based on the value of the gold, zakat must also be paid on the 5 miskals that represent the difference in value. Again, if 5 dirhams of mixed silver valued at 4 dirhams of pure silver are given in exchange for 200 dirhams of pure silver, this is sufficient according to Imam AZAM and Imam Abu Yusuf. This is because it is equal in weight to the required amount. However, according to Imam Zufar and Imam Muhammad, it is not sufficient because its value is less than the required amount. Conversely, if 4 dirhams of pure silver, which is equivalent in value to 5 dirhams of mixed silver, were given in exchange for 200 dirhams of mixed silver, this would not be sufficient according to Imam AZAM and Imam Abu Yusuf, because it is insufficient based on weight. However, according to Imam Zufar, it is sufficient because there is equality in terms of value. Usury cannot be considered between Allah and His servant. 55 regarding the NISAB for gold, silver, and commercial goods. It is not a condition that they be of the same kind. Therefore, if a person possesses a certain amount of gold and silver, as well as a certain amount of commercial goods, and the total value of these items equals 1 NISAB amount, that is 200 dirhams of silver, they must pay 140 zakat. 56 according to Imam AZAM, gold and silver, each of which falls short of the NISAB amount, are combined in terms of value to determine the NISAB. According to 2 other Imams, however, they complement each other in terms of weight. Accordingly, if a person possesses 100 dirhams of silver and 10 miskals of gold, equal in value to 100 dirhams of silver, it unanimously agree that they must pay zakat equivalent to 5 dirhams of silver. However, if one has 100 dirhams of silver and 5 miskals of gold worth 100 dirhams of silver, or if one has 50 dirhams of silver and 10 miskals of gold worth 150 dirhams of silver, then according to Imam AZAM, 5 dirhams of zakat is required. However, according to the other 2 Imams, it is not required because their NISAB amounts are insufficient in terms of quantity. However, if one were to find 150 dirhams of silver along with 5 miskals of gold worth 5 dirhams, zakat will be required by unanimous consensus. This is because their combined value equals the full silver NISAB. Furthermore, since one amount constitutes 3/4 of the NISAB and the other 1/4, the total equals a full NISAB. 57. If there are 150 dirhams of silver along with 5 miskals of gold worth 60 or 80 dirhams of silver, according to Imam AZAM, zakat of 5 dirhams is required, which is 1/40 of 200 dirhams. Since these fractional amounts do not reach 40, zakat is not required on them. According to the opinion of the 2 Imams, zakat must be paid at a rate of 1/40 of these fractional amounts as well. According to the 2 Imams, the donation of these fractions is limited to livestock. This donated fraction does not apply to valid currency or trade goods. According to Imam Shafi, gold and silver cannot be combined to meet the NISAB requirement because they are of different types. A full NISAB is required separately for each. 58. If the gold or silver content of currently circulating alloyed coins is greater than OR equal to the foreign materials mix with them, these coins are considered gold or silver, and zakat is paid accordingly. If the gold or silver content of these coins is less than the foreign materials mixed with them, they are considered commercial goods. Zakat is paid on them at the end of the year based on their value. no intention to trade is required for these, since they are considered valid currency. 59. If valid currency or trade goods are mixed with gold and silver, the following applies. Those in which the gold content exceeds the foreign material are treated as gold, and those in which the silver content exceeds the foreign material are treated as silver. Accordingly, when they reach the NISAB threshold, they become subject to zakat. For such gold or silver, when they constitute a valid currency and are not commodities, their weight is considered. If they reach the NISAB, zakat is due. Otherwise, ITEs, not. However, if there are other assets subject to zakat along with such valid currency that falls below the NISAB, zakat is required based on those assets. 60. When gold and silver that are not currently in circulation are mixed with another metal, the ruling is based on the majority. If the gold or silver exceeds or is equal to the foreign material, the entire amount is considered gold or silver. If the gold or silver is less than the mixed foreign material, the following applies. If the value of the gold or silver portion reaches the NISAB, or if IT does not reach it but there are other zakat subject assets, zakat must be paid on them together. If these are merchandise, their mineral component is also taken into account. If the gold or silver portion of these does not reach this NISAB amount, the entire amount is considered merchandise. In this case, if they are commercial goods, their value must be equivalent to at least 200 dirhams of silver in order to be subject to zakat. Or, if they do not reach the NISAB, they are subject to zakat only if other commercial goods or legitimate currency are present along with them. Otherwise, they are not. 61. If gold and silver are found mixed together in a form other than minted legal tender, the following applies. If the gold alone reaches the NISAB amount, or if the two together reach the NISAB amount and the gold is superior to or equal to the silver in weight or value, then the entire amount is considered gold. Zakat is therefore required. However, if it does not reach the NISAB amount for gold, but is predominantly silver, then the entire amount is considered silver. Example, if there are 20 miskals of gold, but 200 or 300 dirhams of silver, all of them are considered gold, because the NISAB for gold alone has been met. This is the principle. Furthermore, if the gold weighs 10 miskals, but is worth more than 2 or 300 dirhams of silver, then all of it is considered gold. However, if the gold amounts to 10 miskals, but the silver portion amounts to 100 or 2 to 300 dirhams, and is found to be of greater value than 10 miskals of gold, then the entire amount is considered silver.